Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Wednesday, Pooh. I'm Charlotte, and this is Quarantine Storytime. We are reading War and Peace while many of us shelter in place still, or go back to, or are just coming out of quarantine, start sheltering in place for COVID-19 to stop the spread of it. Hope everyone is having a great day and a great week. And we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. If you missed anything, jump over to my playlist, the War and Peace playlist on my channel. The reading every day should go right into that playlist. So even if you have trouble finding the reading on my page, just go over to the playlist, because I try to post the readings as like the highlighted video on my page, but if for some reason you have trouble finding it, you can always go to the playlist, and it should be right there, and they're all numbered so that it's easy to sort through them. Hope everyone is staying abreast of the crazy current affairs. Sorry, my hair is just like funky this morning. I'm trying to just want it pulled back. It's been rather warm the last couple of days, so. And then with wearing masks and the heat and stuff, I'm just trying to keep hair back. But yeah, hope everyone's staying safe. And yeah, there's a lot going on in the world right now. Not sure I'm ready to talk about it right this part of the morning. I know I said some stuff yesterday, and basically all that is still the same today. So yeah, you can see my small soapboxes yesterday if you want a refresher. But remember, there's always links in the video description when I post the video after the fact, with ways to get involved for racial equality and petitions to sign for social justice, especially as it regards to Black Lives Matter and Elijah McClain, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others, unfortunately. So yeah. But yeah, let's jump back in. War and Peace. We're in the war, Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812, and we've been looking at the Bolkonsky family. Old Count Bolkonsky is going quite senile and has quite lost the train, as it were. His son is writing to them to say, "Hey, look, the Russian army is falling back. The French are going to get really close to Bald Hills. They might even, take over the family house. Get out, get to Moscow where it'll be safer." And his dad's like, "They'll never get beyond Poland." He just somehow lost the concept of what his son is writing. So, and we just saw the town of Smolensk, which is like the nearest big city, like kind of like regional capital area, was being shelled and taken over by the French. And one of the sort of footmen, I don't know if I want to call him, like he's like one of the right-hand man of old Count Bolkonsky, who he sends on his errands and stuff, was in the town doing some errands for him and checking out the state of affairs, and saw all this happening, and very nearly came into contact with a lot of the shelling and stuff himself. As he was leaving the town, he actually bumped into Prince Andrei Bolkonsky with the Russian army, who was, again, reiterated to him the importance of getting the family out, both his sister, his father, and his young son. So let's see if that really happens, and if old Bolkonsky is going to be stubborn, because he is a rather stubborn man, and just sort of lead to the family ruin. Princess Maria, unfortunately, has been under the thumb of her father so long that she's so like loves him, but is also so afraid of him that she would never challenge him. And she's almost she trusts his judgment, even though she does also know that his judgment is kind of going. She still somehow trusts it implicitly. So he's somehow his assessment of like the war and battle, she's somehow just kind of goes along with, even though Prince Andrei is writing that, hey, things are bad, she's kind of like also just listening to her father. I don't know if she will have the will to stand up to him if he were to say, if he weren't decided to not, leave the family house. Despite the fact that her young nephew is there, and last thing you need is like he's like around 8 or something now. And maybe not even, maybe 6. So yeah, last thing we need is like a little kid being exposed to war. But whatever. Let's just see what happens, shall we? Sorry. There we go. All right, guys. Sorry. Volume 3, Part 2, Section 5. From Smolensk, the troops continued to retreat. The enemy followed after them. On the 10th of August, the regiment under Prince Andrei's command was going down the high road past the avenue that led to Bald Hills. The heat and drought had lasted for more than 3 weeks. Every day, fleecy clouds crossed the sky, occasionally covering the sun. Hang on. Sorry, let me back up real quick. I want to see the 10th of August. I don't know if he said what day. I was trying to see if it said what day that the Smolensk had gotten bombed. But anyways, from Smolensk, the troops continued to retreat. The enemy followed after them. On the 10th of August, the regiment under Prince Andrei's command was going down the high road past the avenue that led to Bald Hills. The heat and drought had lasted for more than 3 weeks. Every day, fleecy clouds crossed the sky, occasionally covering the sun. But towards evening, it cleared up again, and the sun set in a reddish-brown murk. Only the heavy dews at night refreshed the earth. The standing wheat was scorched and spilled its grains. The swamps dried up. The cattle lowed from hunger, finding no food in the sun-parched meadows. It was cool only at night and in the woods while the dew lasted. But on the high road along which the troops were marching, there was not the coolness even at night and in the woods. There was no dew to be seen on the sandy dust of the road, churned up more than half a foot deep. As soon as dawn broke, movement began. Baggage trains and artillery went noiselessly, sunk to the hubs, and infantry sunk to the ankles in the soft, suffocating hot dust that did not cool down overnight. Part of this dust was kneaded by feet and wheels. The rest rose and hung in a cloud over the troops, filling the air, the eyes, hair, ears, nostrils, and above all, the lungs of the men and animals moving along the road. The higher the sun rose, the higher rose the cloud of dust, and through this fine, hot dust one could look with the naked eye at the sun, not covered by clouds. The sun looked like a crimson ball. There was no wind, and the men suffocated in this unstirring atmosphere. They walked on, tying on handkerchiefs over their noses and mouths. When they came to a village, they all rushed to the wells. They fought over the water and drank it down to the mud. Prince Andrei was in command of a regiment, and the organization of the regiment, the well-being of his men, and the necessity of receiving and giving orders diverted him. The burning and abandoning of Smolensk marked an epoch for Prince Andrei. The new feeling of anger against the foe made him forget his own grief. He was devoted entirely to the affairs of his regiment. He was solicitous of his men and officers and affectionate with them. In his regiment, he was known as our prince. They were proud of him and loved him, but he was kind and mild only with the men of his regiment, with Timokhin and the rest, totally new people and in strange surroundings who could not know and understand his past. But as soon as he ran into someone from his former life, some staff officer, he at once bristled up again. He became spiteful, mocking, and contemptuous. He was repulsed by everything that bound him to the memory of the past, and therefore he tried, in relation to his former world, not only to be unfair, only not to be unfair and to fulfill his duty. True, everything presented itself in a dark and gloomy light to Prince Andrei, especially after the abandoning of Smolensk, which in his mind could and should have been defended. On the 6th of August, and after his ailing father had to flee to Moscow and leave to be pillaged his beloved Bald Hills, which he had built and peopled, but despite that, thanks to his regiment, Prince Andrei could think about a subject completely independent of general problems. about his regiment. On the 10th of August, the column of which his regiment formed part drew level with Bald Hills. 2 days earlier, Prince Andrei had received news that his father, son, and sister had left for Moscow. Though Prince Andrei had nothing to do there, he, with his own peculiar wish to exacerbate his grief, decided that he had to stop and see Bald Hills. He ordered a horse saddled for him, and while on the march, rode to his father's estate where he was born and spent his childhood. Going past the pond where there was always dozens of village women talking together, wielding battledores and rinsing their laundry, Prince Andrei noticed that there was no one at the pond, and a little raft, torn free, half sunk in the water, was floating in the middle of it. Prince Andrei rode up to the watchbox. There was no one by the stone gates of the entrance, and the door was open. The footpaths of the garden were already overgrown, and calves and horses wandered over the English park. Prince Andrei rode up to the conservatory. There was broken glass. Some of the trees in tubs were overturned, and some were dry. He called out for Taras, the gardener. No one replied. Having ridden around the conservatory to the outdoor beds, he saw that the carved wooden fence was all broken and plums had been pulled off their branches. An old peasant, Prince Andrei used to see him by the gates in his childhood, was sitting on the little green bench, plaiting a bast shoe. He was deaf and did not hear Prince Andrei ride up. He was sitting on the bench on which the old prince had liked to sit, and beside him strips of bast were hanging on the branches of a broken and withered magnolia. Prince Andrei rode up to the house. Several lindens in the old garden had been cut down. A piebald mare with a foal was walking right in front of the house between the rose bushes. The shutters were closed. One window on the ground floor was open. A serf boy, seeing Prince Andrei, ran into the house. Alpatych, having sent the family away, had remained alone at Bald Hills. He was at home reading the Lives of the Saints. Learning of Prince Andrei's arrival, he came out of the house with his spectacles on his nose, buttoning himself up, hastily went to the prince, and without saying anything, wept, kissing Prince Andrei on the knee. Then he turned away, vexed at his own weakness, and began to report on the state of things. Everything valuable and costly had been transported to Boguchavaro. The grain, up to 800 bushels, had also been taken there. The hay and this year's spring crops, remarkable according to Alpatych, had been mowed while still green and taken by the troops. The peasants were devastated. Some had left for Boguchavaro. A small number had remained. Prince Andrei, not hearing him out, asked when his father and sister had left, meaning when they had left for Moscow. Alpatych, assuming he had been asked about their departure for Boguchavaro, replied that they had left on the 7th and had explained and again expanded on the details of the estate management, asking for orders. "Shall I let the troops have oats on receipt? We still have nearly 5,000 bushels left," said Alpatych. What answer can I give him, thought Prince Andrei, looking at the old man's bald head shining in the sun, and reading in the expression of his face that he understood how inappropriate his questions were, but that he had asked them just to stifle his own grief. "Yes, let them," he said. "If you've been pleased to notice disorders in the garden," said Alpatych, "it was impossible to prevent them. 3 regiments passed through and spent the night, dragoons in particular. I wrote down the rank and number of the commanders so as to present a petition." "Well, and what are you going to do? Will you stay if the enemy takes it?" Prince Andrei asked. Alpatych, turning his face toward Prince Andrei, looked at him, and suddenly, in a solemn gesture, he raised his arm aloft. "He is my protector. Let his will be done," he said. A crowd of peasants and servants walked through the meadows with uncovered heads, approaching Prince Andrei. "Well, goodbye," said Prince Andrei, turning to Alpatych. "Go away yourself. Take whatever you can with you, and tell the people to leave for Ryazan or the estate outside Moscow." Alpatych pressed himself to his leg and burst into sobs. Prince Andrei carefully removed him and, spurring his horse, galloped down the avenue. By the outside beds, the old man still sat as indifferently as a fly on the face of a dead loved one, tapping the bast shoe on its lasts, and 2 girls, their skirts filled with plums, picked from the conservatory trees, ran out from there and met Prince Andrei. Seeing the young master, the older girl, with a frightened look on her face, seized her younger friend by the hand and hid with her behind a birch tree, having no time to pick up the spilled green plums. Prince Andrei turned away from them in frightened haste, afraid of letting them notice he had seen them. He felt sorry for this pretty, frightened girl. He was afraid to look at her, but at the same time he had an irresistible desire to do so. A new, comforting, and reassuring feeling came over him when, looking at these girls, he realized the existence of other human interests, totally foreign to him, and as legitimate as those that concerned him. These girls obviously had a passionate wish for one thing, to take and finish eating those green plums without being caught. And together with them, Prince Andrei wished success in their undertaking. He could not help glancing at them one more time. Supposing themselves out of danger, they left their cover and piping something in their high little voices, holding up their skirts, ran merrily and quickly with their bare, sun-tanned little feet over the grass of the meadow. Prince Andrei had been somewhat refreshed, leaving the dusty area of the high road along which the troops were moving, but not far from Bald Hills he came back to the road and caught up with his regiment at a stopping place by a dam on a small pond. It was past 1 p.m. The sun, a red ball in the dust, scorched and burned his back unbearably through his black tunic. Dust, the same as ever, hung motionless over the halted troops, buzzing with talk. There was no wind. As he rode across the dam, Prince Andrei smelled the slime and freshness of the pond. He wanted to go into the water, however dirty it was. He glanced around at the pond, from which came shouts and loud laughter. The small, muddy, green pond had evidently risen some 8 inches, overflowing the dam, because it was filled with naked human bodies of soldiers flopping about in it, white, with brick-red hands, face, and necks. All that naked, white human flesh, with whoops and guffaws, was flopping about in the dirty puddle like carp in a bucket. This flopping about suggested merriment, and that made it particularly sad. One fair-haired young soldier, Prince Andrei knew him, from the 3rd Company, with a leather band on his ankle, was crossing himself as he backed up to make his run and dive into the water. Another, a black-haired, always disheveled, non-commissioned officer, up to his waist in water, his muscular torso twitching, grunted joyfully, raising his black, hairy arms and pouring water over his head. There were sounds of slapping, shrieking, and hooting. On the banks, on the dam, in the pond, everywhere there was white, healthy, muscular flesh. The officer Timokin, with a little red nose, was wiping himself on the dam. Seeing the prince, became embarrassed, yet ventured to address himself. "It's nice, Your Excellency, if you'd be so pleased," he said. "It's dirty," said Prince Andrei, wincing. We'll clear it for you right away," said, and Timokin, still undressed, ran to clear it. "The prince wants to." "Which? Our prince?" voices said, and everyone started hurrying, so that Prince Andrei barely managed to calm them down. He decided it would be better to have a shower in the shed. "Flesh, the body, chair à canon," he thought, looking at his naked body, and he shuddered, not so much from the cold as from the revulsion and horror incomprehensible to himself at the sight of this enormous number of bodies splashing about in the dirty pond. On the 7th of August, Prince Bagration, from his quarters in Mikhailovka on the Smolensk road, wrote the following letter to a Greek chief, but he knew that his letter would be read by the sovereign, and therefore considered every word as far as he was capable of doing so. "Dear Count Alexei Andreevich, I believe the minister has already reported that Smolensk has been left to the enemy. It is painful, sad, and the whole army is in despair that the most important place has been abandoned to no purpose. I, for my part, begged him most insistently in person and finally in writing, but nothing moved him to agree. I swear to you on my honor that Napoleon was in such a sack as never before, and he could have lost half his army but not taken Smolensk. Our troops fought and are fighting as never before. I held out with 15,000 men for more than 35 hours and beat them, but he did not want to stay even 14 hours. It is shameful and a blot on our army, and he himself, it seems to me, should not even be alive in this world. If he reports that the losses were great, it is not true. Maybe around 4,000, not more, and not even that. Even if it was 10, what can be done? It is war, but the enemy lost endless numbers. What would it have cost to stay 2 more days? At least they would have withdrawn on their own, for they had no water for their men and horses. He gave me his word he would not retreat, but suddenly sent disposition that he would leave during the night. It is impossible to make war that way, and we may soon bring the enemy to Moscow. The rumor is going around that you are thinking about peace. God forbid that we make peace. After all the sacrifices and after such muddle-headed retreats, to make peace, you will set the whole of Russia against you, and everyone of us will think it a shame to wear a uniform. If things have gone this way, we must fight as long as Russia can, and as long as there are men left standing. One person must be in command, not 2. Your minister may be good as ministers go, but as a general he is merely bad, but not merely bad, but trash, and to him the fate of our whole fatherland was entrusted. I am truly going out of my mind with vexation. Forgive me that I write so boldly. Clearly, one who advises the concluding of peace and puts a minister in command of an army does not love the sovereign and wishes the destruction of us all. And so I am writing you the truth. Call out the militia, for the minister, in a most masterly way, is bringing a guest with him to the capital. The great suspicion of the whole army falls on Mr. Imperial Adjutant Wolseggen. They say he is more Napoleon's than ours, that he is the minister's advisor in everything. I am not merely polite with him, but I obey him like a corporal, though I am his senior. This is painful, but loving my benefactor and sovereign, I obey. Only it is too bad that the sovereign entrusts our fine army to the likes of him. Imagine that on our retirade, we lost over 15,000 men from fatigue and in hospitals. If we had been on the offensive, that would have not happened. Tell me, for God's sake, what will our Russia, our mothers, say, seeing we are so frightened, and that we are giving up such a good and zealous fatherland to such rabble and instilling hatred and disgrace in every subject? Why are we cowardly? Who are we afraid of? It is not my fault the minister is irresolute, cowardly, muddle-headed, temporizing, and has every bad quality. The whole army is completely in tears and scolds him to death. Section 6. Among the innumerable subdivisions that can be made in the phenomena of life, one can subdivide them all into those in which the content predominates, those in which the content predominates, and those in which the form predominates. Among the latter, as opposed to the life of a village, a Zemstovo, a province, even of Moscow, can be counted the life of Petersburg, especially its salon life. That life is unchanging. Since 1805, we had made peace and quarreled with Bonaparte. We had made constitutions and unmade them. Yet the salon of Anna Pavlovna and the salon of Helene were exactly the same as they had been. The one 7 years earlier, the other 5 years earlier. In just the same way, people at Anna Pavlovna's talked with perplexity about Bonaparte's successes and saw both in his successes and in the indulgences shown him by the European sovereigns a malicious conspiracy aimed solely at causing unpleasantness and anxiety in the court circle, of which Anna Pavlovna was this representative. In the same way, at Helene's, when Romantsev, himself favored with his visits and considered a remarkably intelligent woman, as in 1808, so in 1812 they talked with rapture about the great nation and the great man, and looked with regret upon the rupture with France, which, in the opinion of the people who gathered in Helene's salon, would end in peace. Recently, after the sovereign's arrival from the army, some sort of flurry had gone on in these opposing salon circles, and there had been some sort of demonstration against each other, but the tendencies of the circles remained the same. In Anna Pavlovna's circle, Frenchmen were accepted only from among the inveterate legitimists, and here the patriotic thought was upheld that one should not go to the French theater and that maintaining a company of actors costs as much as maintaining an entire army corps. Military events were eagerly followed, and the most advantageous rumors were spread about our army. The pro-French circle of Helene and Romantsev refuted the rumors about the cruelty of the enemy in the war and discussed all of Napoleon's attempts at reconciliation. This circle reproached those who advised overly hastily arrangements to do with preparing the court and the girls' institutes under the Dowager Empress's patronage for departure to the Kazan. In general, the whole matter of the war was presented in Helene's salon as empty demonstrations which would quite soon end in peace. And there reigned the opinion of Bilibin, now in Petersburg and a familiar at Helene's. Every intelligent person had to be received in her salon, that the matter should be resolved not by gunpowder, but by those who invented it. This circle, ironically and quite intelligently, though also quite cautiously, laughed at the Moscow raptures, news of which had come to Petersburg with the sovereign. In Anna Pavlovna's circle, those raptures, on the contrary, were admired and spoken of as Plutarch speaks of the ancients. Prince Vasily, who occupied all the same important posts, was the connecting link between the two circles. He visited mon bon ami Anna Pavlovna, and he visited dans le salon diplomatique de ma fille, and often in his ceaseless moves from one camp to the other, became confused and said at Anna Pavlovna's what ought to have been said at Helene's, and vice versa. Soon after the sovereign's arrival, Prince Vasily got to talking at Anna Pavlovna's about the matter of war, harshly denouncing Barclay de Tolly finding himself undecided about who should be named commander-in-chief. One of the guests, known under the name of Un homme de beaucoup de mérite, having told how he had seen Kutuzov, who had just been chosen as commander of the Petersburg militia, sitting in the Treasury office over the enlistment of soldiers, allowed himself to cautiously voice the suggestion that Kutuzov might be the man who would satisfy all the requirements. Anna Pavlovna smiled sadly, observed that Kutuzov had never caused the sovereign anything but trouble. I said over and over at the assembly of the nobility, Prince Vasily interrupted, but they didn't listen to me. I said that his selection as commander of the militia wouldn't please the sovereign. They didn't listen to me, he went on. And before whom? It's all because we want to ape to those stupid Moscow raptures, said Prince Vasily, becoming confused for a moment, forgetting that at Helen's one had to make fun of the Moscow raptures, but at Anna Pavlovna's to admire them. But he corrected himself at once. Well, is it suitable for Count Kutuzov, the oldest general in Russia, to sit in an office at Ilo Restechapot-Sapien? Is it possible to appoint a commander-in-chief, a man who cannot mount a horse, who falls asleep at a council, a man of the lowest morals? A nice reputation he's made for himself in Bucharest. I'm not even speaking of his qualities as a general, but it is possible at such a moment to appoint a man who is decrepit, blind, plain blind, a fine thing to have a blind general. He can't see a thing, like playing blind man's bluff. He sees precisely nothing. No one argued against that. On the 24th of July, that was perfectly correct. But on the 29th of July, princely dignity was bestowed upon Kutuzov. Princely dignity might also mean that they wanted to get rid of him, and therefore Prince Vasily's opinion continued to be correct, though he was no longer in a hurry to voice it. But on the 8th of August, a committee was assembled made up of General Field Marshal Saltykov, Arikchiv, Vyazmitinov, Lupkin, and Kochubey to discuss matters of war. The committee decided that the failures came from the municipality of command, and though the persons who made up the committee knew that the sovereign was ill-disposed towards Kutuzov, the committee, after a brief consultation, suggested the appointment of Kutuzov as commander-in-chief. And that same day, Kutuzov was appointed commander-in-chief with full power over the armies of the entire region occupied by the troops. On the 9th of August, Prince Vasily met la homme de beaucoup de mérite at Anna Pavlovna's. La homme de beaucoup de mérite was paying court to Anna Pavlovna on the occasion of his wish to be appointed a trustee of the Empress Maria Fedorovna's Institute for Girls. Prince Vasily came into the room with the air of a happy victor, a man who had achieved the aim of his desires. Eh bien, vous savez la grande nouvelle. Le Prince Kutuzov est marshal. All the disagreements are over. I'm so happy, so glad, Prince Vasily was saying. Enfin voilà un homme, he said, casting a significant and stern glance at everyone in the room. The homme de beaucoup de mérite, despite his wish to obtain a post, could not help reminding Prince Vasily of his former opinion. This was impolite both towards Prince Vasily and Anna Pavlovna's drawing room and towards Anna Pavlovna, who had received the news with as much joy, but he could not help himself. Mais on dit qu'elle est avec mon prince, he said, reminding Prince Vasily of his own words. Allez donc, il est votre assise, Prince Vasily said in a brisk, bass voice with a little cough in the voice. With a little cough. The voice and the little cough which made him resolved, with which he resolved all difficulties. Allez, il votre assise, he repeated. And what makes me glad, he continued, is that the sovereign has given him full power over all the armies, over the entire region. A power that no commander-in-chief has ever had. He's another autocrat, he concluded with a victorious smile. God granted, said Anna Pavlovna, il homme de beaucoup de mérite, still a novice in court society, wished to flatter Anna Pavlovna by defending her former opinion of this judgment, said, they say the sovereign gave Kutuzov his power reluctantly. On dit qu'il rugit comme un démocile à l'égal en l'arrête, je compte. Elle lui descend. Le souverain et la patrie vous décernent cet honneur. They say he blushed like a young lady to whom someone was reading Jacon, saying to him, the sovereign and the country bestow this honor on you. Peut-être qu'il corps n'était pas de la partie. Perhaps his heart was not in it, said Anna Pavlovna. Oh, no, no, Prince Vasily stepped in vehemently. Now he could not yield Kutuzov to anyone. In Prince Vasily's opinion, Kutuzov was not only good in himself, but everyone adored him. No, that can't be, because the sovereign was able to value him so much before. God grant only, said Anna Pavlovna, that Prince Kutuzov may exercise real power without letting anyone put spokes in his wheels, des bâtons dans leurs roues. Prince Vasily understood at once who this anyone was. He said in a whisper, I know for certain that Kutuzov stated as an absolute condition that the Grand Duke should not be with the army. Vous savez ce qu'il a dit l'Empereur? And Prince Vasily repeated the words Kutuzov was supposed to have said to the sovereign. I can neither punish him if he does wrong, nor reward him if he does well. Oh, he's a most intelligent man, Prince Kutuzov. Et quel caractère! Ah, je le connais de longue date. They even say, said l'homme de beaucoup de mérite, who did not yet have courtly tact, that His Excellency laid down an absolute condition that the sovereign himself not come to the army. As soon as he said it, Prince Vasily and Anna Pavlovna turned away from him in an instant and looked at each other sadly with a sigh at his naivete. While this was going on in and his naivete, section passed Smolensk and were moving closer and closer to Moscow. Napoleon's historian, Thiers, like his other historians, said, trying to justify his hero, that Napoleon was lured to the walls of Moscow involuntarily. He is right, as all historians are right, who seek the explanations of historical events in the will of one man. He is right, just as the Moscow historians of the Moscow command, as the Russian historians are right, who maintain that Napoleon was lured to Moscow by the skill of the Russian commanders. Here, besides the law of retrospection, which presents all the past as the preparation for the accomplished fact, there is also a reciprocity that confuses the whole matter. A good player who loses at chess is generally convinced that he's lost because of a mistake, and he looks for this mistake from the beginning of his game, but forgets that there are also mistakes at every step in the course of the game, that none of his moves was perfect. The mistake he pays attention to is conspicuous only because his opponent took advantage of it. How much more complex is the game of war, which takes place in certain conditions of time, and where no single will is guiding lifeless mechanisms, but everything is a result of numberless collisions of various wills. After Smolensk, Napoleon sought a battle beyond Dogorobuzh at the Vyazma, and then at Tzavero-Zaymysh. But it turned out that, owing to numerous collisions of circumstances, the Russians could not accept battle before Borodino, 75 miles from Moscow. From the Vyazma, Napoleon gave orders to move directly upon Moscow. Moscow est la capitale asiatique de ce grand empire, la ville sacrée des peuples de Alexander. Moscou, avec ses innombrables iglesias en forme de pagodes chinoises. Moscow, the Asiatic capital of this great empire, the sacred city of Alexander's people, Moscow, with its innumerous churches in the form of Chinese pagodas. This Moscow gave Napoleon's imagination no rest. On the march from Vyazma to Tzavero-Zaymysh, Napoleon rode on his bob-tailed light bay Amber, accompanied by his bodyguard, pages, and adjutants. The chief of his staff, Berthier, had dropped behind in order to interrogate a Russian prisoner with his cavalry had taken. Accompanied by his translator, Lelange d'Adville, he galloped to catch up with Napoleon with a merry face reined in his horse. Eh bien, said Napoleon, un Cossack de Platov says that Platov's corps is marching to join the main army, that Kutuzov has been appointed commander-in-chief. Très intelligent et bavard. Napoleon smiled and told them to give this Cossack a horse and bring him to him. He wanted to talk with him personally. Several adjutants galloped off, and an hour later, Lavrushka, Denisov's serf, whom he had let go to Rostov in an orderly's jacket, and on a French cavalry saddle, with a sly and drunken, merry face, rode up to Napoleon. Napoleon told him to ride beside him and began to ask, "You're a Cossack?" "Yes, Your Honor." Les Cossacks ignorent la compagnie dans laquelle ils se trouvaient, car la simplicité de Napoléon n'avait rien que put révéler, et une imagination orientée la présence d'un souverain s'entrant avec la plus extrême familiarité des affaires de la guerre actuelle, said Thayers, recounting this episode. The Cossack, unaware of the company he found himself in, for Napoleon's simplicity had nothing that could reveal to an Oriental imagination the presence of a sovereign, conversed with extreme familiarity on the affairs of the present war. In fact, Lavrushka, having received a whipping the day before for getting drunk and leaving his master without dinner, had been sent to a village to get some chickens, and there, carried away by pillaging, had been taken prisoner by the French. Lavrushka was one of those coarse, insolent lackeys who had been around, who considered it their duty to do everything with meanness and cunning, who were ready to perform any service for their master, and who cunningly guessed their master's bad thoughts, especially the vain and paltry ones. Finding himself in the company of Napoleon, whose person he recognized very well and easily, Lavrushka was by no means thrown off, and only tried wholeheartedly to give service to his new masters. He knew very well that this was Napoleon himself, and the presence of Napoleon could not throw him off any more than the presence of Rostov or of a sergeant major with a whip, because there was nothing he could be deprived of by either a sergeant major or by Napoleon. He blurted out everything that was the talk among the orderlies. Much of it was true, but Napoleon asked what the Russians thought about defeating or not defeating Napoleon. But when Napoleon asked what the Russians thought about defeating or not defeating Napoleon, Lavrushka narrowed his eyes and fell to thinking. He saw a subtle cunning here, as people like Lavrushka always see cunning in everything, so he frowned and paused. "It's like this. If there's a battle," he said thoughtfully, "and at the soonest, then that's just that. But if it happens 3 days after that same date, then it means that same battle is going to put a drag on things." This is how it was translated for Napoleon. "Si la bataille est donnée avant courageuse, la Française la gagnerait, mais que si elle serait donnée plus tard, Dieu seul sait ce qu'on arrive. If the battle is given within 3 days, the French will win, but if it should be given later, God only knows what will happen." The Loge de Abbeville conveyed with a smile. Napoleon did not smile, though he was clearly in the most cheerful state of mind, and asked these words be repeated for him. Lavrushka noticed it, and to cheer him up more, said, pretending not to know who he was, "We know you've got Bonaparte. He's beaten everyone in the world. Well, with us things are different," he said, not knowing himself how and why this boastful patriotism had slipped into his words towards the end. The translator conveyed these words to Napoleon without the end, and the Bonaparte smiled. "Le jeune Cossack fit sourire son puissant interlocuteur." The young Cossack made his powerful interlocutor smile, says Thayers. Having ridden several paces in silence, Napoleon turned to Berthier and said he would like to test what effect would be produced sur cet enfant du don by the news that this man with whom the enfant du don was speaking was the emperor himself, the same emperor who had written his immortally victorious name on the pyramids. The news was conveyed. Lavrushka, realizing that this had been done in order to take him aback and that Napoleon thought he would become frightened, so as to cater to his new masters, instantly pretended to be amazed, dumbfounded, goggled his eyes, and made the same face he was accustomed to make when taken off to be whipped. "À quien l'interprète de Napoléon, says Thayers, avait le palais que les Cossacks cessaient d'une sorte d'avishement ne profère plus une parole et marche les us constamment, está attaché sur la conquête dont le nom avait pénétré jusqu'à lui à travers les steppes de l'Orient. Toute cette quantité s'était subitement arrêtée pour le faire place à un sentiment d'admiration naïve et silencieuse. Napoléon, après l'avoir récompensé, le fit donner la liberté comme à un oiseau qu'on rende hors chance, quelle honte vous naîtrez. Hardly had Napoleon's translator spoken when the Cossack, seized by a sort of amazement, offered not a word more, and rode on with his eyes constantly fixed on his conqueror, whose name had penetrated as far as him, across the steppes of the east. All his loquacity was suddenly stopped, to give place to a feeling of naive and silent admiration. Napoleon, after rewarding him, set him free like a bird that one sends back to the fields where it was born. All right. Napoleon rode on, dreaming of that Moscow which so filled his imagination, and l'oiseau qu'on rendit hors chance, quelle honte vous naîtrez, galloped to the outpost, inventing beforehand everything that had not happened and that he would tell to his comrades. What had exactly happened to him, he did not want to tell precisely because he thought it was not worth telling. He rode out to the Cossacks, asked them the whereabouts of the regiment that was part of Platov's detachment, and towards evening found his master, Nikolai Rostov, who was staying in Yankovo and had just mounted up to go for a ride with Ilyin around the neighboring villages. He gave Lavrushka another horse and took him along. And that's the end of today. Oh my goodness, Lavrushka is like quite the little scoundrel. What a scallywag. And there you have it, people. I love that line. I'm going to leave it there, but I did love that one line, which I think bears repeating. Where they talk about historians seek explanations of historical events in the will of one man, and how he calls it the law of retrospection, which presents all past as preparation for the accomplished fact, which I think is really interesting because I feel like that happens a lot, and I think that's one of Tolstoy's like recurring themes, is that we all, looking back, we see how all these things added up, and of course that's it all was carefully, precisely given that way, as opposed to like this happened because there was a lot of things going on and a lot of contributing factors that you don't even notice now, and that when it was happening, no one could have predicted the outcome. And I think that's really insightful. I also thought it was really funny that Prince Vasily's complaint about Kutuzov, like, he's blind man, like the blind leading us around. He knows nothing. I was like, oh man, I can relate. So anyways, I hope you guys have a great Wednesday. I will see you tomorrow and we will read more tomorrow. All right. Ciao. Ciao, Bella.